We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Friday, August the 7th, 2026, and welcome to it because we have a lot to get to today. Today, we're going to cover down on the United States debt, getting to about $500 billion in a month. The Vice President of the United States has some thoughts on combating waste, fraud, and abuse. Lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. There's some more revelations about the FBI targeting Donald Trump, and then the FBI director is claiming that they're stopping 2 terrorist attacks a day. Airlines don't like mass deportations, and neither do Utah Republicans. Cell phone tower dumps are now unconstitutional, and a New York police bigwig was the wheelman for a gang shooting. So let's get after it. My dad is a huge fan of the movie The Patriot, the Mel Gibson Swamp Fox sort of faction story about the Revolutionary War. And in that movie, one of the catchphrases, one of the things he always hears and he eventually starts to deliver is stay the course, stay the course. That's going to sort of guide us today because I have a lot of stories to get to. I mean, over a dozen. We're going to have to churn and burn through them. But we're going to stay on course for what we like to typically cover down on this program, and that is things related to law enforcement matters, government weaponization, and just overall common sense sort of stuff. So we're not going to talk about Iran. We're not going to talk about how Anthony Fauci will never face any sort of justice, all the things you can get everywhere else. We're going to talk about things that I like to talk about, and such are the benefits of having your own podcast. You get to cover what you want and then talk in the third person, as I want to do now, because we are about to talk about the U.S. national debt. Not too many nerdy stuff, though. I just quickly want to touch on it. It is disturbing. This report, it comes from ClintonMachuki.com. Headline, U.S. national debt rises $450 billion since July 1st. That's almost $500 billion in a month, guys. The official Treasury figures confirm that the debt is near overall $40 trillion, while the Bipartisan Policy Center tracks fiscal 2026 toward a large annual deficit from entitlements, interest, and other spending. Well, that's kind of overly broad. Interest, so we're spending money on things we've already consumed, which is going to put us into a pauper's grave. I mean, think about if you buy a house, you pay the mortgage, right? Now, included in your mortgage is an interest payment, but theoretically, you do have the benefit of having the house now. You're not going to have to wait 30 years and make a payment every single month and then eventually move into the house. That is the price of getting into the house now. It's called interest. You have the roof on your head, you got the 4 walls, protect you against the weather and the elements, and you get to call yourself a homeowner. That's the interest. But what we're paying interest on $40 trillion, and nearly $500 billion was just added in the last 40 days, is things we've already consumed. So it's like paying interest on a hamburger that you ate last week. Not really a good financial decision. So interest, entitlements, because we are now a socialist country. We have a robust social safety net, as they like to describe it, but effectively, you have a huge number of American citizens and people who are legal aliens on the teat of the government. And then we just throw it out there, other things. Yeah, a whole lot of other things. And when you have a whole lot of other things, you get into stuff like grants for green energy, right? And there was a whole big thing about this when the Donald Trump administration came in early on about the Biden administration on the way out the door. Now they were throwing the gold bars off the back of the Titanic as the ship was sinking. So Lee Zeldin, who was the administrator, I think he's atop the Environmental Protection Agency. I think his job is actually administrator. I could be wrong. You have to correct me if I'm off on that one. He came out and said that the EPA were not going to send another $20 billion to a lot of these organizations that are out there at the teat of the federal government because Joe Biden made some sort of a deal in a money laundering scheme with a green energy nonprofit charitable organization, with healthy air quotes around charitable organization. Well, those organizations brought the EPA to court and have gotten a very favorable ruling. So, from the New York Times, at one point, a newspaper headline: Appeals Court says EPA cannot block billions in climate grants. Well, I mean, who cares? We just spent 450 billion. What's a few billion more, I guess? Now, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was a Biden era, as they called it, green bank, just stealing, I mean, taxing from you to send it to their buddies who claim to head some nonprofit, nonpartisan charitable organization that cares about the sun god. 10 judges in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia upheld an earlier injunction that said that the EPA cannot terminate $20 billion in climate grants, meaning that a bunch of judges wearing black robes said that they can effectively force the federal government to steal, I mean, tax from you to send money to these organizations. Now, the New York Times is very excited about that, and they throw out this one line, which I did get a kick out of. The delay has taken a toll on the grant recipients, which relied on the funds for basic expenses like payroll and office rent. I mean, they needed that sweet, sweet government cash that's stolen, I mean, tax from you, in order to pay their people and rent their space, because they don't actually offer a product that people want, need, and desire. They are wholly beholden to the federal government. Power Forward Communities, which received $2 billion in the grants, that's 2 out of 20. 10%. They were down to 2 employees earlier this year. I want to get to them in a second, but there were a couple of organizations that got mentioned and just got me a little bit curious because, I can somehow ascribe ill intentions to these organizations and say, they're just a leftist front group that's getting out the vote, or they're pushing ahead on some communist agenda. And I'm probably right, but it helps to do the research. Steve, where are the receipts? Well, one of the groups was called Climate United, which I have a link to in the show notes for today, but I'll throw it up there nonetheless. Climate United wants that sweet, sweet government cash. They take on perceived risk to make green investments more attractive to private capital. That's a very fancy way of saying they take money that's stolen from you and then infuse it into these projects, which otherwise couldn't get off the ground. And that will attract investors because the investors will say, oh, the government will bail us out. Every public dollar we invest, I mean, that's another way of saying steal, is multiplied by private investment. Our lending is a down payment on a more secure economic future led by local communities across the U.S. It sounds nice. It sounds charity-ish, nonprofit-ish. But what are they actually saying? They're taking money that's stolen, I mean, tax from you by the government, and being doled out to these groups to do loans for projects. They're just a middleman. I guess they could be doing the vetting to make sure that the solar panels are going to be affixed properly, but they probably don't care very much. But why is this process actually necessary? And these are the sorts of processes that get us into $40 trillion of debt. The government, legally, because of the social compact memorialized in our Constitution, those pesky, dusty documents, cannot just steal, I mean, tax from the citizens and prop up a green energy project. Theoretically, that can't happen. Congress has to appropriate it. That didn't happen here. Instead, Congress did the thing where they say, we shall have green stuff. We'll have clean energy. And then the Biden administration, or whoever is in charge of the executive branch, those administrators, those bureaucrats said, oh, well, we can't actually use government funds to build the stuff we want. So we'll just issue grants to these groups that do it for us. We've effectively deputized these nonprofits to be government actors. And of course, those in charge of those nonprofits happen to be their buddies. So I mentioned the Powered Forward Communities. That 2 employees and that $2 billion did sound pretty familiar to me. And I thought about it for a second, and then I pulled up the website. And actually, let me just throw the website up here. This is a janky looking website, right? Like the last one, that Climate United, like it looks cool, right? There's nice picture there with some solar panels. I scroll through here. There's other pictures. If you happen to be listening to us, it's kind of hard to explain, but there's links to their leadership, their resources, their news and press. But then I went to the Power Forward communities, which looks like yours truly tried to make a website and failed, because there's almost no information. It's nothing there. And then I thought, oh yeah, there was that whole thing about Stacey Abrams. She was the one-time declared herself governor of Georgia, but twice failed gubernatorial candidate. This was the group that she stood up, having no background at all in green energy, and the Biden administration gave $2 billion of your dollars to her for an organization that employs 2 people. So yeah, I think Lee Zeldin stood on firm footing, but this court ruling, it went the wrong way, and it'll be up to the EPA to actually take it up to the Supreme Court to see if they can get a more favorable ruling that says that the executive branch is not compelled to spend a butt ton of our money on things that are not objectively in the interest of the American people and just laundering taxpayer funds straight out of the Treasury to their political allies. That sounds like abuse, definitely fraud, certainly wasteful. Let's head on over to the Washington Post for an op-ed by the Vice President of the United States. So JD Vance submitted the following to the Washington Post of all outlets, because democracy dies in darkness. Headline: "The president is fighting a fraud crisis. Now Congress can help." Now, before I get to what Vice President Vance said, I did take note of who they have to give like his bona fides. I mean, if you submit an op-ed to the New York Times, they'll say that, well, in my case, Steve Friend, former FBI special agent, host of a podcast. They don't like me, so they'd probably say something like a conspiracy theorist, a would-be whistleblower with healthy air quotes. But they would give something, right? For JD Vance, I mean, former senator, best-selling author. He's done some venture capital stuff. He's the vice president here. They say vice president in lowercase letters. They won't even give him the actual term. They hate the guy so much. But what does the vice president actually write? "Countless Americans will depend on programs funded by the generosity of our fellow citizens at some point in their lives." Pause. Yeah, that's called charity, Vice President Vance. You're not talking about that, though. You're talking about coercion and compulsory taxation. I mean, theft from the American people to stand up our robust social safety net so the money can be redistributed from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. And there are so many people who depend on that. To describe that, and again, as something that's charitable, the generosity of our fellow citizens. What if I don't feel generous? Oh, I go to jail? Oh, okay. Every dollar stolen by a criminal is a dollar that fails to reach the Americans who need it. Correct. So we should probably rely on charity, since they do a far better job of vetting the source of the recipient of the generosity. I think the federal government has been considered and weighed, and pretty much stinks at addressing who is actually rightful and wrongful recipient of the money that we so generously at the tip of a gun provide to our federal government to redistribute. We've uncovered an estimated $230 billion in fraud across Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP, and the pandemic era loan measures such as the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, and other federal benefits. So just everything, he just listed off some of those programs like food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, PPP, which is definitely in the billions. The PPP program, where the government just shoveled out billions and billions of dollars to people without finding out why they were asking for it. Effectively, you could say, I was thinking about starting a power washing business. Here's a receipt for a power washer. And then ask the government to send you a bunch of money because you couldn't do it because they told you to stay home and stay safe. And that was considered right and justified, not fraud at all. To say nothing of Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps. We're giving food stamps to illegal aliens. And what was the figure that JD Vance cited? Because he's atop this task force to eliminate fraud that, because of an executive order from the president of the United States, it stood it up. It was an all across the executive branch sort of effort, except for the FBI, which is in charge of corruption investigations. They weren't invited on it, but the task force to eliminate fraud was going to be the little baby of JD Vance as he gets ready to run for president in 2028. This was going to be his capstone project. And they have, according to him, uncovered $230 billion of fraud. Not recovered, they've uncovered. Oh, they realized that they got bilked out of $230 billion. That's roughly half of what the government spent, more than what it should have last month. $450 billion more than we took in was spent in the last month. And you're bragging about uncovering, not recovering $230 billion. How much have they actually recovered? According to the vice president, it's $56 billion, hardly a drop in the ocean. That's what, 9% of the debt that was accumulated since July 1st. Now, JD Vance, as vice president, can only do what he can do in the executive branch. He is calling on his counterpart. We have a balance of power here, right? We learned about it in grammar school, 3 co-equal branches of government. The judges screw us on birthright citizenship and insist on the EPA sending billions of dollars to Stacey Abrams. So not really dependable branch of government. But what can we do with Congress? JD Vance is a Republican. The president of the United States is a Republican. The Republicans control the House and the Senate in the Article 1 branch. Can they not work together on this to address lions, tigers, and bears? I mean, waste, fraud, and abuse. JD Vance has a couple of thoughts, a couple of recommendations for Congress to take up, again, in this piece from the Washington Post. He says that lawmakers can start by passing a measure to strengthen oversight and accountability of federal benefits programs through stronger data sharing requirements. I guess this is going to end in Palantir getting another government contract. Well done, JD Vance, because oversight and accountability are definitely on the agenda for Congress, who likes to have hearings and then write strongly worded letters and make referrals over the Department of Justice for the likes of Anthony Fauci and Hillary Clinton, and then nothing ever happens, right? Nothing happens, trademarked, but we'll have oversight. So James Comer from Kentucky can be the chairman, for at least for a few more months until the Democrats sweep into office. He'll be the chairman of the oversight committee, and then he'll use money that's stolen, I mean tax from you, in an investigation so that he can hold a hearing. And then he'll have his hearing with his nice sound bites that'll get him on Fox News and talking to Sean Hannity. He'll tweet about it, write a strongly worded letter, make a referral, send a fundraising email, and then have a ghost written book that you can buy for $29.99 that contains all the information that you already funded via your tax dollars. That's JD Vance's recommendation. Now, I mentioned that he is atop this task force that's supposed to look into fraud at the federal government. The FBI is not included in that, which is kind of a black eye, kind of a slap in the face to the agency and to the agency head, who we'll get to in a couple of minutes. But writ large, I think it's an objectively good decision to not include the FBI in any sort of effort to conduct a judicious investigation, an honest investigation, because the FBI's demonstrated itself to be an untrustworthy organization over and over and over again. And we got the latest revelations about how politicized the FBI became against Donald Trump when he was the president the first time around. This actually comes from the White House's website. The press release says FBI secretly opened probe alleging Trump fired Comey because he was a Russian asset, declassified memos show. So they go into, again, we're going to do Russia, Russia, Russia. I really appreciate how they use the term probe, seeing as how it's not an FBI term, but I guess it's a way to shorten the word investigation. It's a synonym for that. So the internal FBI memos, newly declassified by the White House, show the investigation, codenamed Oxford, was launched in the immediate aftermath of James Comey's firing in May of 2017. So Donald Trump came into office January. He held on to James Comey for a little while. And then a few months later, he fired James Comey. I think he fired him when he was in California making a speech. And so he wasn't allowed to fly the jet back. He had to find his own way home, which is kind of funny because James Comey's a jackass. So he was fired in May, and the investigation was opened right afterwards. The investigation, the probe by the FBI, started to investigate Donald Trump, the sitting president of the United States, because he fired James Comey. The allegation was that the White House is making here is that they used as the predicate, the reason, the rationale, because you have to have an allegation or information in order to open up an investigation, was based on Steele dossier stuff that the FBI knew wasn't true. And we're not going to go into the whole Russia stuff. That's not the point of bringing this up. I actually want to bring it up for another reason, because here's the quotation from the Electronic Communication, the EC, that justifies the opening of this probe, this investigation into the sitting president of the United States. Quote, the FBI is opening a full investigation based on an articulable factual basis, we're good so far, that reasonably indicates that President Donald J. Trump may be or has been wittingly or unwittingly involved in activities for or on behalf of a government of the Russian Federation, which may constitute violations of federal criminal law, blah, 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 blah. Wittingly or unwittingly. Oh, so he did it on purpose or unknowingly? So he proactively did something, or something just happened that he was unaware of, and that would justify opening up a full counterintelligence investigation on the president of the United States? Yeah, not illegal, guys. Not outside of the policy. And that is really the truly terrifying thing. This is the problem that the Durham report actually got into. The Durham report, which isn't recent, said that the FBI was within policy. I mean, there were certain things that they could have done better, but ultimately, there's no amount of training or new guardrails that you could put up. It always comes down to the people. The people have to be vetted as having integrity and doing the right thing. The right thing and the legal thing might not be the same. I always use this example. It's worth throwing out. The use of a SWAT team is a perfectly legal and justifiable thing in some circumstances, but legal, definitely constitutional. It's a legitimate law enforcement tool. Now, if you happen to get a speeding ticket and then you forget that traffic court is Tuesday, and then the judge is upset with you and issues a bench warrant, is it legal for the local sheriff's office to send a SWAT team to your house? Yes. Completely constitutional. It might be within their policy. It is within FBI policy if you happen to have a dog. Yes. If you have a dog, the FBI is justified in sending a SWAT team to your house. If you happen to have a gun, that Second Amendment written down in the pesky, dusty document, the FBI is justified in sending a SWAT team to your house. If you're somebody like me and you have advanced training, you did the super secret squirrel stuff where you went to SWAT school, like every other SWAT school in the country, but for the FBI, they consider you to be like a tip of the spear killer. They'd send a SWAT team to my house, regardless of what the allegation was. But is it ethical? Is it moral? Do you have integrity? That's the question. And what the Durham report showed was you can't do reform with the same people. You can't have people there who don't have integrity because they will abuse the system. All the protocols and the policies, they'll find a way. They'll have the most buttoned up probe investigation into the president of the United States because it's legal and they can. And the wittingly and unwittingly thing, let's get into that. He doesn't have to be the subject of a counterintelligence investigation, he being Donald Trump. He could be the bad guy. He could be the victim. If they think, the FBI thinks that the president of the United States, he might be the victim of a counterintelligence case. Maybe Vladimir Putin or one of his stooges over in Russia is secretly manipulating Donald Trump. Well, he could be the victim. We better look into him. And once they have their man, they can search for the crime. All on the up and up by the policy, but definitely an unethical thing. And that was borne out by this Oxford comma operation. Now, before we move off it, there are two names that get thrown out here that are worth throwing out just to show you the cast of characters and where was that accountability after all. The counterintelligence division for the FBI is the one that opened it up, which makes sense because they would be the one saying, well, he could be a victim, so let's dig into him. And the two people that signed off on it were James Baker, the guy who went off to Twitter, right? He was the guy that was censoring people during the next election, saying that, Hunter Biden might have been doing some nefarious things. That had to be censored. James Baker was doing that. And then we had another name, William Priestap. He was the assistant director for counterintelligence. Might have heard him by Bill Priestap. He was the guy who actually wrote it down on paper, that when James Comey sent 2 agents to interview, what's his name, the general, Mike Flynn, Bill Priestap wrote, "What's our goal? To get him to lie so we can charge him with a crime?" That's the cast of characters that were there at the FBI, and neither one of them are in prison, which is probably why they shouldn't be included on some sort of anti-fraud task force that the vice president is digging into. All right, now let's talk about the current leadership for a couple of next stories here over at the FBI. And I have this one. It is a Reuters piece, but Thomson Reuters, Westlaw picked it up, and it's not behind a paywall. So I'll have this one up there, and I'll show this link today. The headline here, exclusive. Under Patel, FBI forges unprecedented law enforcement ties with China and Russia. Wait, that's fantastic. Not beating the allegations very much, are we here? The partnerships have involved personnel exchanges in which Chinese law enforcement officials have visited the U.S. and FBI agents have traveled to China to work on cases together. I'm sure when those FBI agents went over to China that all the information that was on their devices wasn't just hoovered on up. They share intelligence with each other. I'm sure the CCP is very forthcoming with lots of intelligence. Separately, FBI and Chinese officers have carried out joint raids and arrests under the arrangement. Patel returned from a trip to Beijing in late July. That was his second trip to China. And he's planning a similar trip to Russia, tentatively planned for October, which will be great heading into a midterm election when the FBI director who serves under Donald Trump, who's been accused of being a Russian stooge, who's had multiple FBI investigations open up against him, even if they were justified or not, the narrative is there, to send his FBI director off to Russia to go and play nice. And I'm sure it went really well when we allowed representatives from the CCP into FBI space. That I, as somebody who had to be reinstated as an FBI agent, they said, well, you have to be escorted because you, sir, are not trustworthy. But we're going to let Chinese people roam around in an FBI office. Here's the remark that the FBI director gave, quote, "The fact that we did it with China when everyone said, don't do it, and you can't do it, shows that we can do with almost anyone." No, it shows that you're retarded and you didn't listen to just the basic commonsensical thing, and that is don't allow China into an FBI workspace. God, this guy. And this guy, Kash Patel, he's now also bragging about the FBI foiling a bunch of terrorist attacks. Let me throw this up there. FBI foiled 715 planned terror attacks last year, says Director Kash Patel. The attacks were aimed at places of worship, schools, and business. And you can see him there looking off into the distance. Well, that's a bunch of bull, guys, because what he actually said was that the FBI disrupted 750 terrorist attacks. It's a semantics game. And unless you know, you don't know. The FBI foiled 700 planned attacks. Let's just take that for a second. That would mean that the FBI roughly foiled 2 terrorist attacks every single day for a full calendar year. Every day. That includes weekends and holidays and Fridays like today, right? A federal Friday where everybody's just heading home around 2 p.m. And you want me to believe you stop 2 every single day, which means that the terrorist attack prevalence in this country is on par with the Middle East. Like, we have that many terrorist attacks legitimate around this country. How do we not have car bombs going off all the time? It makes no sense. These guys are just so tip of the spear. They're so awesome that they stopped every single one. Not one slipped through the goalie. No. They're government workers, guys. They're glorified DMV employees. And yet they were able to foil 2 terrorist attacks every single day. Not true. What they are claiming, in actually the words, is disrupt. Because disruption is a fake FBI statistic. It's a contrived term that the FBI invented for itself to achieve. It's a statistical accomplishment that they can then put into a report to Congress, which does oversight, James Comer style, and doesn't know what a disruption actually means. And they think, because they speak English, that disruption means that it was actually a foiled terrorist attack. And they're all too happy to send another $11 billion to the FBI and reauthorize things like FISA 702. But what is a disruption? Well, it's a statistical accomplishment. It could mean that you arrested a bad guy, but not all the time. And it varies depending on what the violation is. A disruption for a criminal case, like in white collar, would be different than a disruption for a gang case, which will be different from a disruption for a terrorist case. I worked on Indian country. They changed the meaning of what a disruption was in the middle of the year. At first, I was told, hey, Steve, if you're dealing with some sort of criminal enterprise, like a public corruption sort of case, then if you indict a bad guy, that's a disruption. You've disrupted their activities. And then when you arrest him, that's another one. And then when you convict him, that's another one. And then when you finally get him sentenced a couple of years from now, that's a fourth one. Well, that was a problem because I had a case involving 9 people. They were members of a tribal council, which would mean that I disrupted 36 public corruption cases. 4 times 9, 36. That doesn't make sense. So they said, oh, Steve, just do one for every time you arrest someone. But we want to juke the stats. So make sure that when you go to arrest the bad guy, don't arrest them all the same day because that only counts as one disruption. That's what the policy says. We got to stay by the policy, right? So instead, arrest one on Monday and another on Tuesday and a third on Wednesday and work your way across. Don't have to work the weekend. Just pick it up on Monday and we'll get 9 disruptions out of this. And that's just for a public corruption case on a podunk town on an Indian reservation in northeast Nebraska. Let me give you some examples of terrorism disruptions that you could get. We're not talking about imminent, the guy was about to push the button on the IED, on the S-vest while he waited in line at the airport. What are some examples of disruptions? Well, I pinged people who I know who work in this area. If you interview the suspect, that's a disruption because he probably thinks the walls are closing in. Or he's a retard and has no idea. You still count it. If a deportation happens, a deportation of somebody who's a member of a gang from South America that is now designated as a foreign terrorist organization, ICE picks him up, you have now disrupted a terrorist attack. Congratulations, FBI agent. If the local police happen to arrest the subject who you're looking at for a completely unrelated crime, you get to claim a disruption. And the last one that I got, which was really funny, if they're in custody and planning to do something bad, like a prison riot or just assault another inmate, and it happens to be interdicted by the jailers, you get to claim a disruption, as long as the guy was a subject of a terrorist investigation. So that's how you get to the number of 715, quote unquote, foiled planned terrorist attacks last year. And Kash Patel is out there bragging about it like a jackass. All right. I want to cover this new decision that came out from the courts at about the tower dumps. But before I do, guys, so let's make sure that we pause for a moment here and remind you, if you haven't already, please give us a nice thumbs up and a follow, subscribe here on the American Radicals podcast, which comes to you live every noontime on weekdays on Rumble at AmRadPod, also YouTube at AmRadPod. And you can head on over to the Spotify channel as well, where the show isn't live, it is lively. I'll drop the episode there after we get done recording the live show. And that is also similarly under AmRadPod. 5-star reviews if you do the iTunes thing, the iHeart, all of the things helping us to grow here, trick those algorithms, helping stay the course, focusing down on some of the things that we've covered down today, which you won't find anywhere else. I'd appreciate it. And I'll schedule an ad to run now. Let's get into the court decision that just came down, which is an extension of the Chatri case, that geofence warrant that we covered. That was like July 4th week. That was the decision that the Supreme Court came down on, where it was kind of a half decision. It was 2 issues that were decided there. The geofence warrant being, well, can law enforcement go to Google and say, as long as somebody clicked, I agree to use the app, that they have to turn over everything? And what the Supreme Court decided in the Chatri case was that 2 issues: voluntariness, Is it voluntarily given over? Did you, by clicking I agree, voluntarily give your data over to Google? Supreme Court said, no, that wasn't voluntary at all. But they sent the other part of it down to the lower courts, and that was the general warrants question. Is it a general warrant for law enforcement to go to Google and say, give us everybody in this particular area who happen to be using Google? That still is waiting. But it's looking like it is going to be actually a general warrant and therefore an unconstitutional thing if you go by this new decision that came down about tower dumps. So separate, apart from the Chatri decision, which involved using apps on a phone. But this is technology. This is phone related. Let's throw this up there. The headline from courtwatch.news is Judge rules tower dump search inherently unconstitutional. Now, for tower dumps, what law enforcement has done in the past is throw out to the cell phone company, hey, we need to know every phone that hit this area in this particular time frame. And then they would do the same thing for another tower. And then they would do the same thing for a third tower. And then they would cross-reference and see if a particular phone hit all three towers. And then you can cross-reference and have your bad guy. And the background for this actual decision is an FBI case. FBI agents investigating a series of violent crimes committed in Jackson, Mississippi, submitted 4 warrants to the magistrate judge in February 2025. Now, the judge in this case said, that's kind of a general warrant. I'm not going to give it to you. And the FBI said, we're going to appeal that. We want law enforcement to be easy. So we're going to take it to the appellate court, which is exactly what they did. And the appellate court said, nope, can't have it. So we'll see if this one works its way up actually to the Supreme Court, or if they're going to keep in consistency with what the Supremes talked about with the Chatri decision. And that is that this is overly broad. Does it suck? Yeah, it sucks for law enforcement. It's difficult. It's supposed to be difficult. Are there victims who might have their justice delayed? Yes. But there is the downstream consequence. There is a slippery slope argument, because if you allow law enforcement the ability to just go to a cell phone company or go to a tech company and say, give us all of the information and then we'll suss it out what we need and toss the other stuff aside, well, they're going to hoover up a bunch of innocent people's information, which they're not entitled to, because we have a pesky, dusty document that says that theoretically there's a Fourth Amendment. And on top of that, it could be abused, very much like the way that the FBI abused its protocols and abused the laws to go after a sitting president of the United States, because he could be the victim of a counterintelligence ploy by Russia. They went after January 6ers using the geofence warrant. People who were exercising their First Amendment right to gather, to speak, to petition, to redress their grievances in a building that's theoretically open 24 hours a day to them. And they were roped into a giant dragnet by the geofence warrant. Similarly, the same thing would happen with the tower dumps that are at the fingertips of law enforcement, which might not be at the fingertips of law enforcement after this appeals decision came down. We'll see if it actually does work its way up to the Supreme Court. All right. Now let's do some series of illegal alien deportation stories. So first, let's head to the Wall Street Journal. But potatoes, they're all liberal, leftist, communist rags for this piece. The headline here, it's about the airlines and the airports, which are very unhappy with mass deportations. Headline, airlines push back against ICE enforcement at airports. In one case, in July, an immigration and customs enforcement officer tried to board a Southwest Airlines flight to Dallas to make an arrest, only to be rebuffed by the airline. I guess there were like flight attendants or the people that do the checking, the ticket check, that tried to stop an ICE agent, a law enforcement officer with a gun and badge and an arrest warrant in hand, from going onto an aircraft. All right. Should they have gotten the illegal alien probably while he was going through TSA? Yes, but we don't know the circumstances. Maybe there was a safety issue. Maybe they didn't want to endanger the public. Maybe they wanted to get him on some sort of a steel tube because they figured that it would be better, more optimal for their circumstances. They didn't want it to happen as the boarding process. We don't know the circumstances. But an employee of an airline tried to stop a law enforcement officer from making a lawful arrest. That's hindering That's obstruction. You go to jail for that. And I'm sorry if it offends your sensibilities. That's ridiculous. And that hasn't extended, it's extended actually beyond that. In recent weeks, officers have broadened their approach to make more arrests near gates and ticket counters. Well, that would be better, right? They wouldn't be stopping the flight from going. But that's a problem from the airport's perspective. While earlier cases primarily involved ICE pursuing immigrants, i.e., illegal aliens, with final deportation orders, the arrests now involve people with expired visas, but another form of legal status pending, such as a green card or asylum application, which they can go home in order to get. Visa holders with applications pending typically have been allowed to continue working in the US and have protections from being deported. ICE has argued that the expired visas are grounds for arrest. Yeah, you know what? They may have in the past been allowed to remain here while the process played out, but there's no guarantee of that. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that in the Constitution. Get your butt home and then apply for some other reason to come to the United States. And then we can suss it out whether or not we want to let you back. But just remaining here, that's never been a guarantee. And ICE exists for the sole purpose of ejecting illegal aliens if they've overstayed a visa, if they flooded across the border during the Joe Biden Huma Ruma administration. It doesn't matter. ICE exists to eject all of these people from the country. And if they happen to be sitting at the TSA security line, or they've made it through TSA and they're waiting to board, or they're on the airline in general, ICE is entitled to snatch them up and then eject them from our country. That is reasonable. And the Wall Street Journal is very offended, as are people who are working in the airports or for the airlines in general. Here's the quote we got from the Denver International Airport. Phil Washington, he was the chief executive of the Denver airport. Quote, I'm worried about escalation. I'm worried about bystanders. So you're worried that ICE is going to arrest somebody and that will endanger bystanders? Why? Oh, because the individual that they're arresting is violent? So that's a good thing for your passengers, sir. Removing a violent illegal alien who wants to fight with the police from the airport is probably an objectively good thing. Oh, you're worried about escalation from a bunch of crazy people who want to stop ICE from doing their job? Well, they're a bunch of crazy people about to board an aircraft. Why would you want them on an aircraft? You know, one of these jetliners that could fly into a building somewhere and hurt a whole bunch of people. No, no, you're just another leftist communist like those who write for the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or CBS News, which is the next story I want to get to, because we got to get a sob story in today, guys. We got to make sure. This one's not about Abuela with their missing leg because of the diabetes. And it's not about a service member, but this one is really going to hit you in the feels because it's about a MAGA person. It's about a Trump voter. CBS News is all too happy to report on it. Headline, Trump voter pleads for fiance's release after ICE arrest. Quote, they're destroying families. He's a lifelong Republican and a Texas businessman. John Gannon said his plans to marry Yasmin Suarez Reyes were derailed when she was arrested by ICE at Houston's International Airport. Another airport arrest. Quote, go after the criminals. We're all for that. But leave this mom and pops and kids alone. Man, he's destroying families, Gannon added. He voted for Trump. He's very upset with it. I guess he didn't look at the fine print when the president of the United States said mass deportations. Now, the details of this woman, her name is Suarez Reyes. She came to the U.S. legally in October 2023. Then she applied for asylum. So once she got a toehold in, she came from Venezuela and she has citizenship in Spain, which is a first world nation, and she could go there anytime she wants. But she said, well, I need asylum in the US. And she claimed it in 2024. She had 90 days when she came here originally. She applied for asylum immediately. So within a couple of months, within the 90-day window, CBS News says, well, she should get to stay here. No, you can make that claim. It's still pending. We could send your butt wherever we want. We could detain you, send you back to Venezuela. Or you could just fly to Spain and apply for another way to come to America. It's not like Spain is that dangerous, well, unless you happen to be near the Moroccan border. Suarez Reyes got a work permit and a Texas driver's license. Wait, so while she was waiting here as an illegal alien, she got a work permit from this government and a Texas driver's license, so the state of Texas accommodated an illegal alien, we got some problems, guys. Suarez Reyes would also have an avenue to apply for permanent residency or a green card if she were able to marry our guy here, who's the former Trump supporter, Trump voter, John Gannon. And as a final, he's 75-year-old, so he's a boomer. She's 45. So I'm sure that they were just in love. She totally wasn't some sort of a a hanger-oner, right? A sugar baby, right? A gold digger, right? He's a Trump voter, so he likes everything gold. She's a gold digger. She's definitely not trying to abuse the system here. No, she's got to go. Sorry, not sorry for Miss Suarez Reyes. Sorry, not sorry for John Gannon. I guess you didn't read the platform for the dude who you pulled the lever for. And, I've got one more that, well, no, actually, before we get to that, we got to counter the story, guys. We got to counter it. So for all the sob stories, I want to make sure that we are keeping up and hitting and returning the serve. So let's go to the Department of Homeland Security for this one, which is truly despicable. The headline here: ICE arrests illegal alien charged with sexually assaulting and murdering a 2-year-old child in Virginia. So spare me, Southwest employees. Spare me, airline attendant. Spare me, Trump voter in Texas. We got illegal aliens raping and murdering 2-year-olds in Virginia. The details here, without getting too graphic, according to local reports, the child's mother took the 2-year-old to the Goochland County Sheriff's Office on July 4th. Deputies began life-saving measures to save the child, who was then taken to a hospital where she later died. The Louisa County Sheriff's Department arrested our bad guy here, whose name is Raul Genesis Ortiz Moran, a criminal illegal alien from Mexico, as a suspect in the child's death. And there is the face of evil for you right there, guy. Raul Genesis Ortiz Moran. Genesis, hopefully it ends with a exodus from this world in the form of a wood chipper for this piece of trash. All right, I've got one more story related to illegal alien deportation because, with Republicans like these, who needs communists? This is John Curtis. He's the senator from Utah. It's a press release from his office. Curtis Kelly proposed state-sponsored visa pilot program. Kelly being the Democrat senator from Arizona. U.S. Senators John Curtis and not John Kelly, Mark Kelly. John Kelly was a chief of staff during the first Trump administration. There's just too many people to keep track of. Too many of these Irishmen. So Mark Kelly, John Curtis introduced the state-sponsored visa pilot program of 2026. It's a bipartisan legislation. That means compromise, getting some of what I want, some of what you want. This is how the magic happens. They want to create a new temporary visa program that allows states to address their unique workforce and economic development needs. Under the legislation, states could voluntarily establish state-sponsored visa programs tailored to their labor market demands, subject to the approval of Homeland Security. What does that mean? Well, that's a very government-esque, politician-esque way of saying that individual states could give visas to illegal aliens so they can pick the crops, take jobs from Americans because they have to plug those gaps, but it's subject to the approval of the Department of Homeland Security, which is headed by Mark Wayne Mullen as Secretary of Homeland Security, the guy who last weekend told the entire nation when he addressed the National Governors Association that we have to plug those holes and give asylum and work visas to a bunch of people to work on the farm. So I'm sure that'll be rubber stamped. With the Republicans like these, who needs communists? And with Republicans like those, it's no surprise that some of them are losing in the primaries to people who aren't even running for office. So I've got two stories to close us out for today, completely unrelated to each other, but they made me laugh, and I want to bring them to your attention. So the first one comes from the New York Times. Headline: Trump-backed Republican loses to little-known rival who had suspended his bid. This is pretty awesome, actually. And I don't know anything about the guys involved, right? They might be total dirtbags across the board, but it's funny nonetheless. According to local, wrong story. On Wednesday morning, Tom Smith, which sounds like a fake name, a small business owner from Flint, Michigan, was surprised to learn he had soundly defeated Amir Hassan, a Navy veteran that Donald Trump endorsed. So Donald Trump endorsed the Navy vet whose name is Amir Hassan, and the New York Times tries to imply that the Republican voters voted against him because they're all secret Islamophobe racists, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because the president endorsed this guy. This guy, Amir Hassan, lost to Tom Smith by 17 points. Tom Smith got over 50% of the vote. Hassan got like 33%. Just last week, Trump had rallied in Milford, Michigan for Republicans, including Hassan. Smith announced in July that he was suspending his campaign. So last month, he called it quits. He put his full support behind Al Lemo, a third candidate. And as of Wednesday, Lemo's website displayed a banner reading, "Thank you, Tom Smith." Smith won despite running 0 TV ads and a handwritten letter to the federal regulators because he didn't even file formally, like online, or type up a letter to Federal Election Commission. He reported raising only $1,800, and yet he was able to get over 50% of the vote because American elections are totally on the up and up. All right, last one. And I tease this at the outset. We're going to get back into some law enforcement matters and some corruption matters here. This one is wild, and it comes from the New York Post. Headline: New York police bigwig was getaway driver for goon son in gangland shooting. Wow, that's a great title of a piece by the New York Post. Jennifer Lackard, a deputy police commissioner with the Mount Vernon Police Department, was arrested at her home along with her son, Chase, who's 20 years old, after the young man, the son, Chase, allegedly shot at a group of rivals near the Bronx Criminal Court. He then rushed into her car, into Jennifer, mom's car, before she drove off. She was the wheelman in a gang shooting. Nobody was injured in the shooting. The son, Chase, had been on police radars because in 2023, he got shot in a gang fight on board a bus. And the next year, police shot him. I wonder if it was her department after he wielded a gun at them. The mom, Jennifer Lackard, she earned $138,000 last year with the police department. So she put it all on the line to support her son in his endeavors to become some sort of a gangbanger up in upper state New York. Okay, so that's a wild way to end it and close it out for the day, guys. But I do have a fun biblical worldview for you, which comes from Joshua chapter 1, verse 7. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. We're staying the course today. We covered down on a bunch of different things, and it's important to us to stay the course on those and sussing out that information with a very commonsensical perspective, sometimes cynical if it's warranted, definitely sarcastic, laugh whenever you can, because, guys, we accrued another $500 billion of debt as a government in the last month, which ain't good, and it's mostly on interest, which is on hamburgers that we already ate. Fighting fraud, when we could just cancel the welfare in general, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, even if the vice president of the United States is supposed to be in front of it. The FBI cannot most definitely be reformed. We have a plethora of examples today, if not in history. James Comey running off the books investigations or on the books investigations of Donald Trump based on allegations that were already known to be false because he could be the, quote, victim in a case. And then we have Kash Patel out there talking about how the agency that he's the head of is stopping 2 terrorist attacks every single day, but it's a flat out lie. Mass deportations. Had a bunch of stories on that related to illegal aliens and confronting that and the challenge it is. That is everything. Mass deportations are the only course of action. And it's the only course of action that I think of everything that I covered down on that is actually written down in our pesky, dusty documents, that the government has an agreement, a social compact with the citizens in order to protect us against fraud and force, to ensure that illegal aliens aren't raping and murdering 2-year-olds. Ejecting them from the country is the only way that we can actually ensure that we do have a country. So we're going to continue on this program to not only cover the news, but speak in the third person, because this is, after all, a podcast that I own, and I'm interested in these subjects, and as are you, which is why you come here every single weekday at noontime on Rumble and YouTube, and I am definitely very appreciative of that. And like no other exception, we'll be back with you on Monday, guys. Noontime here on Rumble, YouTube at AmRadPod. And until then, have a great weekend.
You've been listening to the American Radicals Podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.